Morning, magandang umaga. It's a pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today. Uh, I will not recall what year we first met, Alan, but uh, because that will date me. Uh, and maybe you as well. Professor Allen Hicken is Professor of Political Science at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and Director of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies. He's also an affiliate of the Center for Political Studies and the soon to be not anymore Wiser out the name why, but for now it's still called the Wiser Center for Emerging Democracy. His work focuses on political institutions, political economy, and policymaking with a special focus on Southeast Asia, where he focuses on Thailand and the Philippines. So Alan told me that he's been to campus many times, but this is his first talk at the University of the Philippines here in Diliman. Uh, Apart from the book that he co-authored that he will give a talk today, he's also author or co-editor of the following book. Building Party Systems in Developing Democracy, published by Cambridge in 2009. Party and Party System Institutionalization in Asia, Cambridge 2014. This was with Eric, right? Eric Kohanta was just here a couple of weeks ago in a summer school on research methods for Canadian and Filipino or Southeast Asian students. And Politics of Modern Southeast Asia, Critical Issues in Modern Politics, Electoral Dynamics in the Philippines, Money Politics, Patronage, and Clientelism at the Grassroots. Uh, Alan has been conducting extensive research in the Philippines for many years. Again, I will not mention, but uh, some of us were part of the project on electoral politics from 2013, 2016, and even 2019, those three electoral cycles. And Alan has devoted a lot of time in mentoring uh, not only Southeast Asian specialists, but also young Filipino scholars. I would even include myself, although I'm not so young anymore. Uh, Alan also co-founded the Southeast Asia Research Group, which is a fantastic network of Southeast Asian political scientists and social scientists. And uh, Alan, I know I personally thank you, but uh, apart from myself, another department faculty was selected as a Young Southeast Asian Fellow. These fellowships are to recognize promising and potential academics or scholars specializing in Southeast. Our department so far, and hopefully there will be more, has two young Southeast Asian uh, to give a talk on mobilizing for elections, patronage, and political machines in Southeast Asia, which he co-authored with three other brilliant political scientists, Edward Aspinall, Meredith Weiss, and Paul Hutchcroft. Ladies and gentlemen, those who are in Zoom, thank you for joining us. May I please present to you Professor Allen.
Thank you so much for that really generous introduction. Yeah, it has been a while since we met. I won't date myself either, but Ares is indicative of I think the wonderful scholars it's been my pleasure to interact with over the years in the Philippines, friends and scholars. This has been one of my favorite places to be over the years. I lived here on a couple of occasions, spent a lot of time going up and down Katipunan Avenue between here and Ateneo. Usually in a jeepney, but sometimes walking if it was too crowded and getting torn along the road. So it's been great to be back and to see how much the campus has grown and have a chance to give a talk. So thanks to Audrey, thanks to the department and university for inviting me to speak today. And as you said, I do want to talk about this this new book that came out just a little under a year ago, Mobilizing for Elections. This is with, you mentioned, with Ed Aspinall, who's an Indonesianist, Meredith Weiss, who was from Malaysia and Singapore, Paul Hutchcroft, who's an amazing Philippine scholar, and myself, who works in Thailand and the Philippines. As an aside, if people have questions about the Thai elections, we talked about that as well. He's there for the elections. But this project started actually a little over 10 years ago as a group of us that were together at actually an AAS meeting and talking about this issue of money politics in the region, trying to get a sense of a better understanding of what this thing was, right? And you can see these questions here. The term money politics is used in a lot of places, but what does it mean? How does it operate? What are the dynamics, right? all the countries in the region use this term to refer to a whole host of things like clientelism, patronage, support, vote buying. We wanted to get a better sense of what this actually was, how it actually operated. So we used these questions to sort of sit down and devise a project that had the following goals. And I'll just go ahead and look at those here. I'm going to put my glasses on to read them from this far. Sorry. What distinguishes the forms of patronage that candidates and parties and campaigners deliver to voters? So, are there different? So, what kinds of things are you giving? Are you giving money? Are you giving cash? Are you giving goods? Are you doing collective? Are you doing individual? Right? What does that look like? Through what sort of political networks do these patronage networks, do these patronage flow? What are the kinds of institutions, organizations, again, networks that politicians use to direct and channel these goods and services? To what extent do specific types of political networks tend to be associated with particular types of patronage? So do these things tend to go together? Certain networks are affiliated with certain kinds of patronage. And then how do the distinctive patterns of patronage and patronage politics actually work? And to what extent do they actually influence voters? Do they matter? Right? Do they actually change how voters behave, how voters think about politics? Do they change how public policy is conducted? So the first four of these questions are really descriptive questions, right? So part of this project, big part of this project, is just kind of map what was going on, right? There's lots of really good work describing how this works in one particular locale or one particular country. Very little comparative work across, even within countries, across locales, and certainly very little across countries. And just trying to move beyond anecdote to data, right? To be able to understand how does it actually operate in the ground? What are the dynamics? What are the contours? How do we understand this thing? And then, of course, we want to understand the why, right? What explains why we see this pattern that we do across Southeast Asia? So I'll just note that we are not obviously the first set of scholars who think about clientelism in Southeast Asia. There's a really rich tradition of this in Southeast Asian studies. You can go back to Halalan's work in 1965 and look at patronage politics across the Philippines. Jim Scott's work in the early 1970s, looking at clientelism and patron-client relationships across Southeast Asia. But interestingly, the last few years, last 10, 15 years, there's this real renaissance in the study of clientelism, comparative clientelism around the world. It's likely ignored Southeast Asia. It's been based in Latin America, particularly a few countries in Latin America, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, although some others as well, Africa, South Asia, India features prominently in this literature, even Japan and Taiwan. Southeast Asia is just largely absent from this literature, with some important exceptions. And so part of our goal in the project is basically to recenter Southeast Asia in these debates. We felt that A, you can't just ignore this region, but B, that studying this region would actually call into question some of the assumptions, some of the conclusions that other scholars are reaching by studying clientelism in other contexts. So just to give one example, scholars who study clientelism in Latin America and to some extent South Asia are operating in environments with really strong parties. And so a lot of what they take for granted, they take for granted the fact that these parties are, these national machines, and that doesn't exist in much of Southeast Asia. Certainly not in the Philippines, not in Thailand until very recently, not in Indonesia. And so that we thought that might actually matter for how this looks, how this operates, how this unfolds on the ground. Okay, so we had a set of countries here that we're looking at. Our three primary cases are Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines in the book. They have secondary cases of Singapore, Timor-Leste, and Thailand. Thailand was supposed to be a primary case, and then the coup happened. Actually, the day I arrived to set up this election study, while I was in the air, the coup happened. So Thailand became a secondary case. We weren't able to do that. But what we did is around national elections in each country, one main election and then also supplemental elections. So we were here for the 2016 election with the big project and then smaller projects in 2013, 2019 as well. And around those elections, we had sort of two big components. The biggest component is what we might call extensive ethnographic research. So we assembled these big teams of researchers, around 50 in each country, some of whom are here in this room today, to be part of that election for 2 to 4 weeks before the election, to travel around with candidates and campaigns, to observe campaign events, to interview candidates and their staff, take lots of photos, right, and to produce. They ended up producing thousands of pages of documents on again what campaigning looked like, field events, how the kind of appeals the candidates were making, how voters were responding to that information. And then the four of us, of course, then around elections and other times, spent a lot of time in the field as well, interviewing candidates, meeting with campaign staff, et cetera. We also then supplemented that with national surveys in each of the countries with some survey experiments built in, and then, and particularly in the Philippines, but also a little bit in Indonesia, we also did local surveys of brokers and voters in a couple of places in the Philippines. I'd like to talk more about that if folks are interested. Okay, so we've had a lot of stuff that's come out of this project. I'll highlight just a couple there. We some produced directly by us, some by broader members of the project. These are just the books. There are lots of articles as well. I'll note that the top center there is a book by Allen Hicken and Halalan, who are part of this project. They've got a book that draws on the researchers, the work researched by members of this project. We also have the electoral dynamics in the Philippines and Paul Hutchcroft's book on electoral reform in the Philippines, also sort of being generated out of this project. So it's been a really fruitful and pleasant, although hard work, partnership. And still think why there are lots of articles I think are coming. What are we hoping to do in this? What do we hope we do in this book? Well, first we hope to show the types of patronage, the networks through which they flow, are indeed actually mutually constituted because they tend to go together. We want to show or analyze where these things come from, so how state building, institutions, the timing of elections, how those combine in different ways to produce these kind of different patterns. We also want to challenge from the understanding of what and the motivations behind handouts. Right? What is actually happening in this exchange? We also distinguish on the types of patronage. I'll just mention here the three types that we sort of break these down to. We talk about micro patronage, which are handouts directed to individuals or households. Meso patronage, which is like for club goods, local public projects, things that are given either to geographic groups, so a barangay, a neighborhood, a city, or to other collective groups, the Jeepney Drivers Association, or Fishermen's Group, or Women's Collective, for example. And then we have macro patronage, which we define as things that look sort of like public goods, but are hijacked or turned to the sort of personal advantage of a politician. Right? They take national programs and try and either in reality or by implication make voters think that these are actually contingent on supporting that politician. I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. And then we explore the ways in which patronage and politics interact with identity and identity groups, and then finally explore what we call islands of the spectrum. So not the cross-country variation, but the interesting variation within countries. So exceptions to the general pattern. So you want to drop this down really quickly. We'll do a quiz afterwards. This is one of the main tables in the book, but I'll just quickly highlight. We identify in the three main countries three types of mobilization regimes. Electoral mobilization regimes, that's the term we coined. I'll talk about each. But what's important is for each sort of type of regime, we note that the different types of patronage that are used, the sort of mix of micro, meso, and macro, the mix of patronage versus more programmatic politics, the timing of the distribution, does it happen just around election time, or is it more or less continuous in between elections? The source of patronage, is it public funds that are basically being used for this, or is it coming from Canada's personal funds or their sponsors, right? Where are these resources, this kind of patronage coming from? And then, of course, as I mentioned, the islands of the country. So we identify these three broad patterns. So Malaysia is as a part, I'm going to move this so I can actually see the words here. Sorry, give me 1 second. Maybe. Oh, I can't, so I'll just keep it there. So Malaysia is a party machine. If you know anything about Malaysian politics,
It's starting to change a little bit now, but this is a very party-oriented system. So patronage tends to flow in and through the party, and that patronage comes from the fusion of the party and the state. So the party draws on the state and then funnels that patronage through its party network to voters. And candidates are able to mobilize user votes because of their link with the party. And this is true whether or not they're with a dominant party coalition for years or in the opposition party in areas where the opposition control politics. The primary tools used in Malaysia were MISO and macro. So very little in the way of sort of vote buying, micro-particularism, with the exception of Sabah and Sarawak. We do see that there. But generally, public goods projects or and then national projects that are very clearly party branded, right? Everybody knows this is UMNO or Pakatan that are doing these projects, this clear association, where in many ways, the party trumps the candidate. And it's very clear that you're getting this stuff because of the party's the party's action, the party's preference. Indonesia is sort of the other extreme. Indonesia has these ad hoc mobilization teams that are organized around elections, sometimes called team success teams. And these are candidate specific, not party specific. Each candidate assembles their own, and they start with their friends and family. And they build a core campaign staff, but then they run out, right? They don't have enough friends and family to be able to reach all the voters they need to reach in order to win election. So then they have to rely on guns for hire. These are people with very tenuous connections to the campaign. They may not even know the candidate personally, and they hire them to work just for the duration of the election. And then after election, no association, no continued relationship, right? These are just, again, literally guns for hire. And as you might expect, lots of concerns then in Indonesia about the reliability of these folks, right? Are they going to defect? Are they going to shirk? Maybe they won't work very hard. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll actually take the money and not give it to the candidate, to the voters. Maybe they'll actually work for you, but also secretly for another team, right? So lots of concern in Indonesia about the loyalty, the reliability of these kinds of brokers. And then the Philippines is kind of this middle category, what we call local political machines. These are machines, these are groups, sort of local groups, sometimes branded as a party, often with the name of the candidate or the group of candidates, as in the case here in PTO, the RBQ machine. These are often usually built around mayors or governors, and also often family based. And the thing distinguishes them in form, they look very much like those Indonesian machines, so from the candidate down to the grassroots, but there's a much higher ratio of loyalists to guns for hire. These machines tend to last across elections. They continue to exist and provide services in between elections. They are very focused on delivering, as in Indonesia, lots of micro-particularism, so handouts to both individual households as well as for and local public goods, medical particularism. And again, very clear that these machines are much more extensive and much more durable than what we see in Indonesia. So just a quick example, we just came from a meeting yesterday with a barangay captain and talking about how things work with the barangay and asking about his staff, which is about 180 in this particular barangay. And he says, so how many of those so how important when you're thinking of staff is loyalty? He said, oh, very important. So how many of those 180 staff were people that were affiliated with the campaign or affiliated with your local group? Oh, all of them, sir. Right? All of them. So when he came to power, every person who was in the barangay before lost their jobs. All those people came in who worked for him on the campaign, with the exception, I think it's important to say this, one street sweeper who used to pass by every day going to and from the restaurant with his wife, and his wife said, you work so hard you can't sack it. So he kept one street sweeper, but everybody else were loyal, right? That was part of this team. It had jobs, had opportunities to interact in between. Okay, so I'm not going to have time to talk in detail about these differences here, but then one of the questions is why we see these differences. And in the book, we talk about how the nature of the bureaucracy at timing of elections and the nature of electoral and political institutions shape the development of these electoral regimes and their durability over time. I'm happy to talk more about that as we go ahead. So let me just, I know I'm short. Let me just mention, give a specific example of micro-particularism and then I'll lay off. We can and I'm happy to take questions. So what we're thinking of again is the stuff that's given to individual voters and help them, right? This is the lowest level of these kinds of patronage. So it could be a bag of rice, it could be a job, it could be a scholarship, it could be some healthcare, it could be a bag of cement. Around elections, most often it's cash, right? That's what's flowing in. And so one of the things that we started this project, we really worried, because this is the case in lots of other countries, that it would be hard to get people to talk about this stuff, right? In fact, we had these very elaborate experiments that we're doing in surveys, assuming that people would not be forthright and honest about this. And so in our first interviews in the Philippines and Indonesia, we would ask about these things kind of indirectly, right? How do you mobilize voters? And you've got competition with someone else. How do you make sure that voters are going to vote for you? Thinking that the candidates wouldn't want to talk about this stuff. And pretty quickly we were disabused of that notion. Voters were happy to talk about it. Candidates were happy to talk about it. No social stigma whatsoever. In fact, there's experiments you can do to try and pick up the extent of social stigma in other places in the world. When you ask people directly, you get 9% of people saying that they receive money for the vote. When you ask with experiments, it can be 5 times up, right? In the Philippines, Indonesia, no different, right? You ask them directly, yes. You ask them indirectly, yes, no problem. So we found that candidates were really willing to talk about this. And just to give you one example, we were one day meeting with a candidate for deputy mayor in a municipality in Sorsogon province, sitting there actually on kind of a veranda in his compound, while streams of his brokers were coming by to pick up the stuff to distribute to the folks on election, the night before the election. So they were coming to pick up packages of instant noodles, and he was very clear to say, these are the good, expensive Chinese noodles, not the cheap Filipino noodles. That was his word, not mine. But he wanted to be sure we understood that. And then they were getting bundles of cash to distribute during a couple days before the election. So as we watched this screen sort of come and go, he also gave us a sort of tutorial about how to distribute this money in best practices, he called it, right? How do I use this best practice? So he showed us 3 sample ballots, 2 from opponent candidates and 1 from him. And he said this is the first one. This is a bad example. Each one of these ballots contains 300 pesos. So in Indonesia, often candidates will attach money to our candidate card. Philippines, as you all know, the typical practice is either a letter or a sample ballot that you distribute to voters. So in this case, rookie mistakes all over the place with this ballot. First of all, the money's stable on the back, right? You can't see the candidate's name, right? That's a problem, right? You're not going to have that association. And they use a 200 peso bill, and they stack it on top of a 100 peso bill, so you can't see how much it is, right? It doesn't look as visually appealing. When you have another one, a bit better. In this case, this time stable on the front of the letter with the candidate's picture and information right underneath money from gap. But still, these 300 pesos, this time 100 peso notes, are stapled on top of each other. Can't see how much it is. Again, not the kind of effect you like to have. So then he showed us the good example, which of course was his. Notice front of the ballot, nicely fanned across the ballot. So you can really see 300 pesos. And his name's like right here in the ballot, right? Big, bold. You can see that his name is in bigger font than everybody else's, is big and bold. Then he has other members of the party and team on there as well, but he wants to be sure money, me, right? That's the association, right? No lack of. So what does this stuff mean, right? When a voter receives a handout, what's going through their head? What are they thinking of? What does this actually mean to them? There's a lot of stuff that was another oath in the Philippines, right? And Canada, what Canada's thinking they're doing. So there's a story that's developed in much of Southeast Asia that argues that what's going on here is contingent. That's my timer. Is contingent clientelism, right? That people are giving this. Candidates are giving this contingently, right? I give you this money in expectation that you are going to vote for me. With the implication being, I will monitor you, and if you don't vote, you don't show up at the polls, or I can find out how you voted. You'll be punished if you don't react or act accordingly. And so there's different versions of this vote buying where you target swing voters who are on the fence, and try and get them to cast a vote for you. There is turnout buying where you target your core supporters and get them to mobilize and turn out for votes. And then absent extension buying, where you target your opponent supporters and get them to stay home. We saw examples of all of that in the Philippines, but much less than we had expected. The extensive buying, some great examples of Canada's hiring buses to go into the barangay of their opponents to take them for a beach vacation for the day on election day, stuff like that. So we didn't see those kinds of things, but in general, that's not what we saw. So candidates and campaigns invest very little in monitoring and enforcement. You ask voters, you ask candidates, you ask the brokers, what happens if the voter you gave money to goes and votes on that doesn't show up on election day, or you find out votes for someone else? Almost across the board, without exception, there are some exceptions, like to talk about those, but almost across the board, the answer is nothing. Or I feel a little bit ashamed. But no, candidates don't feel they can do anything. Brokers don't feel like they can do anything. Voters aren't worried about punishment, again, with a few exceptions. And so that has us wondering, what is actually going on here? Why are you doing this? So we argue that what's going on is actually not contingent clienteling. This is not giving this in expectation of reciprocity with implied monitoring and enforcement. But instead, this is something else. We talk about brand buying, brand building, credibility buying, and turf protection. So brand building is the stuff of politics, right? This is a sort of local level form of political advertising. This is where you give out goods branded with your name, a poster, a T-shirt, the water bottle with your name emblazoned, but you do so indiscriminately. Everybody at the rally gets the free T-shirt, right? Everybody along the street gets the cap or gets the water bottles. The goal is to build awareness of who you are, to convey to voters you're someone who's serious, who's generous, perhaps. But there's no expectation on the part of the candidate, anybody who's receiving this is going to vote for them. And the voters feel no moral obligation to reciprocate in any way, right? This is just a free stuff of election. So a lot of that's going on. There's also, though, something we call credibility buying. So this is where candidates direct money to their key supporters in order to demonstrate that they are serious, credible contenders. So think about this as sort of the entry ticket, the ticket price to compete, right? If you don't play this game, and Canada after Canada, I would say, play this game, right? But if you don't play this game, then it's going to be difficult for you to attract voters, to get brokers to work for you. The brokers you do get aren't going to work very hard, and voters are likely just going to ignore you, right? And so you think about this as sort of Canada's caught in a prisoner's dilemma, if you're familiar with that game, right? It would be great, they'd all be better off if they didn't play this game, but if you're the only person not playing this game, you get a sucker's payoff and you lose, right? So you have to, this is the price of admission if you want to run for office. And we got lots of quotes to that effect. If you don't have money, you can't stand. I can't read that one. So the minimum from a candidate is provide Sango pocket money. So that's all. And then the election is harvest time for us. So we take advantage of the blessing as much as we can. And then third, we have turf protection. So there's a lot of, if you ask candidates in any of these countries, but particularly the Philippines, who do you target first? It's always the base, right? Our core supporters, those who we think are most loyal to us, who are going to vote for us, and they would say, vote for us anyway. But then when you ask them, so why, if they're your loyal supporters, why are you giving them money? They'll respond, well, they're actually not that loyal, right? That's essentially the answer, right? If we don't give them money, then they're going to go other places, right? So these are at best contingent loyalists, those who you have to continue to give money to in order to have them continue to think of themselves as part of that team, part of your base. So it's a hedge against defections. Other campaigns, you want to protect your turf, you give it to your supporters to kind of inoculate them against the advances of other campaigns. And interestingly, they're not here giving a hometown discount. Supporters are usually getting exactly the same amount as non-supporters, and you're going to match whatever the other campaigns give. So again, some wonderful quotes here. If voters can't get cash incentives for electoral support for one candidate politician, they will vote for the opponent who can have a better offer. It's a real competition. We give money just to bind them so they're not pursued by others. But it's like herding goats into a holding pen. You can be sure some will run off tempted by the green grass over there. And then perhaps my favorite quote for all this research in any locality: blood is thicker than water, but money, especially if it's a bundle of 1,000 pieces, is much thicker than blood. So I'm just going to skip now because I've taken enough time, but I'm going to skip to the end here. We okay? Okay, well, I'll take a little bit more time. I was told 20, 25 minutes, and I've already talked longer than that, but I'll say a bit more then, okay? I'm always happy to talk if anybody knows me. So what about these particulars? Right? So these particulars, no, let me, sorry. So the idea of that microparticularism is what's going on here. These handouts represent something very different in the literature's often assumed. So there's been this series of articles and books which are pushed back to say, we need to understand this in a different way, right? These things are ubiquitous, they're very important, but they're not generally changing people's votes, right? People, they're very rarely changing outcomes. There are some times when they do, but generally all campaigns are doing this. And it's sort of like white noise, right? It's like political advertising, right? It's not really changing the outcome, but if you don't do it, you lose, right? That's kind of the context. Okay, so we also see lots of mesoparticularism in all three countries. Philippines, across the electoral cycle, Indonesia, generally just around elections. This tends to be a very popular strategy for Canada for a couple of reasons. The first thing, it's less costly than microparticularism. You cannot direct enough individual handouts to be able to win an election. Mesoparticularism allows you to target a larger group, right? A barangay, municipality, something like that. It also is less social stigma. This is something you can brag about. You put your name on, right? You can brand the bridge. You can put your name on the ambulance that's going around the barangay. You can't really brag about that in public about handouts to voters, cash, because it's illegal, and voters are going to say, "Well, how come I didn't get it?" Right? So, but you can talk about the projects you've done, right? That's okay. It's also something you can get access to throughout the election cycle, right? This Philippines is a polity of projects, right? And barangay captains and mayors are always working, and congressmen are always working to secure projects from various sources and deliver to their constituents throughout the electoral cycle. And then it also allows candidates to collectively monitor. There is a secret ballot in the Philippines, although sometimes candidates will try and convince voters it's not secret, right? We put stories of we drilled a hole in the polling place and we got a camera, we can see how you vote, right? To try and sow seeds of doubt. But in reality, most voters think their votes are secret, and they are. You can't tell how individual voters voted, you can tell they turned out, but you can collectively monitor, right? I know that I do a project in this barangay, that I distribute money in this barangay, and I can look to see how did I do in this barangay, right? So collectively, I can do some monitoring, although still not a lot of enforcement. And the goals we find from mesoparticularism are often very similar. So specific contingent patronage, this is giving money in hopes that people will vote for you, to build your brand, to show yourself a credible candidate, and also to protect your turf from encroachment, but often not contingent clientelism, with one exception. We see contingent clientelism only where we have groups that have strict hierarchy and are sort of unified in their sort of preference. So things like Malaysian, right? That's the best example in the Philippines. What we found in Indonesia and the Philippines is that politicians want to believe there's lots of groups out there, and they target the taxi drivers and the transport workers and the fishermen, hoping that by negotiating with the heads of these organizations, they can deliver the vote. Almost never can they deliver the vote, right? Because of modernization, development, lots of other reasons, there aren't these command block votes the ways they used to be. This was a much less effective strategy than it was 20 years ago, for example. We also find that that because of this, politicians have generally, particularly in the Philippines and also Indonesia, moved their mesoparticularism and patronage away from networks of affects. So again, a women's group, a fisherman group, transportation workers, things like that. They still give money to those youth groups, but they channel much more through what we call networks of benefit. So basically, political groups, right? So they channel it down through their allies in the municipality, at the barangay, and then through the ward of groups in the barangay, right? So it's using the political networks to do these things and relying less on social networks outside of those political networks. Still, they still do use those things, but that's not the primary way to reach voters in most cases. And of course, variation across countries on this we can talk about. This is view the perfect bridge over here in Sorsogon, or in Pansur, and then an ambulance provided by a politician in Indonesia. One quick example is from Kalimantan. This is a candidate who sometimes very precise about this stuff, right? So we from candidates actually got in Indonesia. This is about my particulism, but candidates showed us his list of all the brokers, all the voters he was giving money to, and when we saw that, we said, "Oh, hey, when the election's over, can we get a copy of that?" Sure. So we got a bunch of other copies of different surveys. Then we decided we could do this in the Philippines. We actually identified a couple of candidates in the Philippines where we had contacts who, before the election, gave us access to all their broker network, all the voters they were targeting, and we surveyed those brokers and voters. The same candidate, incidentally, in an earlier election, offered to randomize his vote buying for us if we would pay for the election campaign. We said no, tempted for an eighth of a second, and then I thought I could just see the headlines, American professor buying goes to the Philippines. Not good. So we politely declined that invitation, but he did allow us to survey brokers, survey voters, and to see what was going on. Not going to present much of that work right now, but I'm happy to talk about it. In this case, this candidate in Kalimantan, Indonesia, had a list of every local public good project handout he'd given to a community. So a roof for the mosque, new Bibles for the Christian church. He repaved the road. All these listed for each of the equivalent of modern guys in Indonesia. And then not only had these one of those projects, he had a calculation of how those would turn into votes. So this project right here is going to be worth 1,000 votes from this area. This one will be worth 300 votes from this area. And I got to get this many votes to win. So he tallied all up and was sure, his formula, this is good, this is going to work. He lost and lost big. But still, this belief, right, this hope really, that there's going to be this contingency involved, right? If I give these things, people are going to feel obligated to vote for me. It probably raises the chances that people feel good towards the candidate, but doesn't really generate a feeling of a debt of obligation. Okay, so I'm gonna end here. I can talk about that a little bit later, but let me just note a couple of things. First, I want to just note that this is not the only thing going on in elections, right? This is a book that's particularly on money politics and patronage and clientelism. But that's not the only kinds of appeals that politicians make. Politicians are going to use any appeal they can to try and get people to vote for them, including non-programmatic, programmatic appeals, normative appeals, appeals to ethnicity or religion, and charisma or populism. Right? These are all tools in candidates' toolbox. They're going to mix these strategies, right? So this is not the only game in town, nor is it necessarily the most important game, but it's a game that we want to better understand. And then I just want to note that these three electoral mobilization regimes we identify are not the only kind of mobilization regime that might exist out there, but it's also, they're not unique to these countries. So, for example, we see party-based regimes in places like Japan, in Singapore, in Mexico. We see local machines look very similar in there is a Thai history, and we see these ad hoc teams in places like Peru, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea. I also want to note that what does this all mean, right? So does this matter for politics, right? How concerned should we be about this? So I'm going to give sort of a good bad news story on this front. We can talk more about that. On the good news side, right? We found very little evidence that actually changed election law. Again, this is the water that all fish swim in. It very rarely, there are some exceptions, but very rarely induces people to vote for people they weren't already inclined to vote for. So who are you targeting? You're targeting first and foremost people you think are already your supporters, right? That's almost always the case. Second, we didn't see any evidence of what some have called, Susan Stokes called reverse accountability. This is a worry that when you have these kinds of handouts, that you're actually reversing the accountability relationship. The voters are becoming accountable to politicians rather than politicians to voters. And we found very little evidence of that. Some exceptions, and you probably guess what those are, but in general, voters were not worried. They did not feel beholden to candidates in any significant way. They felt fine voting for a different candidate if they wanted. They didn't fear retribution. They were fine punishing candidates who didn't deliver the goods. We don't see any evidence of that. So that's good. And The third thing I get is this is harvest time, right? So this voters, politicians having to do this kind of stuff induces them to give stuff to voters, right? To turn the machinery of government to delivering projects, delivering handouts to voters, either individual or collective. And so voters are getting stuff that they might not otherwise get if we were to set a fair world, right? Or this doesn't exist. But on the negative side, right? So why should we worry about this? So one, it's super expensive, right? It costs a lot to do this. That means that candidates have to recoup those expenses somehow, right? It can be their own personal fortune. They can be beholden to to a sponsor, which has all kinds of interesting implications. They can also get money, from the state through projects, but also just an invitation from, right? Kickbacks, the standard stories about the 10% or 50% or sometimes 20 or 30% kickbacks from construction projects. This kind of actually breeds that kind of incentive, right? You've got to get money, particularly for the micro-particularism. You pursue the meso-particularism of the projects, you can generate cash, which you can then use the micro-particularism at election time. So that's problematic. Restructuring, citizen distress perhaps on voters. And then third, it is really inefficient, right? This is an expensive way to provide public goods or to provide goods and services, and it's provided in ways that are politically contingent. So it's going to not always the greatest need. So, for example, you're just in Manila visiting the city of Manila, some housing projects for the urban poor. And it's amazing new projects, but as we sort of dug and prodded, we found there was this huge scandal about most of these units going not to urban poor, but people who had affiliations with people who were in charge of the housing market, right? When the provisions of goods and services are contingent on the goodwill of a politician, on the intervention of a politician, then we worry about the efficiency, effectiveness, and the fairness of those kinds of things. So that remains hugely problematic. I'll stop right there. We can talk about policy remedies in just a minute, but I'm really looking forward to your questions and thank you.